It's a crisp autumn morning in 1979. The leaves are turning gold, and the small town of Millbrook is just beginning to stir. Sergeant David Martinez adjusts his badge one last time in the mirror, kisses his wife goodbye, and steps out into what appears to be just another ordinary day of police work. But this day would be anything but ordinary, because by nightfall, Sergeant Martinez would be gone. Not injured, not transferred, not on leave. Gone. Vanished into thin air as if he had never existed at all. How does a man trained to solve mysteries become one himself? How does someone whose job it is to find the missing simply disappear? These are the questions that would haunt a community for 25 long years. You see, when regular people go missing, we call the police. But what happens when the police themselves vanish without a trace? What happens when the very person trained to investigate disappearances becomes the subject of an investigation that seems impossible to solve? This is the story of a man who spent his career protecting others, only to need protection himself when it mattered most. A story of dedication, mystery, and a discovery so shocking that it would shake a community to its core decades after hope had all but died. Sergeant David Martinez was 42 years old when he walked out of his house that October morning. He was a father, a husband, a respected member of the force with 18 years of exemplary service. He had solved countless cases, brought closure to desperate families, and earned the trust of everyone who knew him. But on October 15, 1979, all of that meant nothing. Because sometimes the people we trust to keep us safe can't even keep themselves safe. Sometimes the hunters become the hunted. And sometimes the only trace left behind is a question that echoes through time. What really happened to David Martinez? This question would consume his family, perplex his colleagues, and divide a community. It would spawn theories ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. Some said he had enemies. Others whispered about corruption. A few even suggested he had simply walked away from it all. But the truth? The truth was buried deep in the woods, waiting 25 years for a hunter to stumble upon it. And when that moment finally came, it would reveal something far more sinister than anyone had dared to imagine. To understand the mystery of David Martinez's disappearance, you first need to understand the man himself. This wasn't just another missing person case. This was the vanishing of someone who had dedicated his entire adult life to serving and protecting others. David Martinez joined the Millbrook Police Department in 1961, fresh out of high school, and eager to make a difference. At just 24 years old, he possessed something that couldn't be taught in any police academy: an unwavering moral compass and an instinct for reading people that his colleagues would come to respect and rely on. His wife, Maria, would later describe him as the kind of man who couldn't walk past someone in need without stopping to help. David saw the world differently, she remembered. Where others saw problems, he saw puzzles to be solved. Where others saw lost causes, he saw people who just needed someone to believe in them. Over his 18 years on the force, Martinez had built a reputation that was nothing short of exemplary. He had solved dozens of missing person cases, earning him the nickname The Finder among his peers. Families across 3 counties knew his name. When someone went missing, they asked specifically for Sergeant Martinez. His partner of 8 years, Officer Tom Bradley, painted a picture of a man who took every case personally. David never went home until he had followed every lead, knocked on every door, asked every question twice, Bradley recalled. He used to say that every missing person was someone's everything. A mother's son, a father's daughter. That's how he approached every case. At home, Martinez was equally dedicated. He and Maria had been married for 20 years and had 2 children, Michael, 16, and Sarah, 14. Neighbors described him as the kind of father who never missed a school play or a baseball game, despite the demanding nature of police work. He had this way of leaving the job at work, Maria remembered. The moment he walked through our front door, he transformed from Sergeant Martinez into just David, just our David. But perhaps what made his disappearance so shocking was how deeply rooted he was in the community. Martinez didn't just work in Millbrook. He had grown up there. He knew every street, every family, every local business owner by name. This was a man who had turned down 3 offers to join larger police departments in nearby cities. because he believed in serving the community that had raised him. His colleagues respected him not just for his solve rate, but for his integrity. In 18 years, Martinez had never faced a single disciplinary action, no complaints from civilians, no questionable arrests, no corners cut or procedures ignored. He was, by every measure available, the ideal police officer. Chief Robert Harrison, who had hired Martinez nearly 2 decades earlier, would later say, "David Martinez was the kind of cop that other cops aspired to be. He was honest, thorough, and compassionate. If I had to choose one word to describe him, it would be incorruptible." This reputation would make his disappearance all the more puzzling, because when someone with David Martinez's character vanishes without explanation, it forces everyone who knew him to confront an uncomfortable truth. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. October 15, 1979, began like any other Monday morning in the Martinez household. David woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee, and read the morning paper, while Maria prepared breakfast for the kids. It was a routine they had followed for years, a comfortable rhythm that spoke to the stability of their life together. At breakfast, 16-year-old Michael complained about an upcoming chemistry test. 14-year-old Sarah reminded her father about her soccer game that Thursday. David promised he would be there, just as he always was. These weren't the words of a man planning to disappear. Maria would later remember every detail of their final conversation. "He kissed me goodbye at 6:45, same as always. He told me he loved me. He said he'd try to be home by 6 for dinner." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "He said he was looking forward to the weekend because we had planned to take the kids camping." At 7 a.m. sharp, Martinez arrived at the police station for the morning briefing. Sergeant Bill Murphy, who conducted the briefing that day, noted nothing unusual about Martinez's demeanor. David was his normal self, Murphy recalled. Focused, professional, maybe a little tired, but nothing that raised any red flags. Martinez's assignment that day was routine patrol in the eastern district of Millbrook, an area that included both residential neighborhoods and a stretch of rural farmland that bordered the state forest. It was considered a quiet assignment, the kind usually given to officers who had earned the right to an easy day. His first radio check-in came at 8:15 a.m. from the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street, where he had stopped to help an elderly woman whose car had broken down. The call lasted 3 minutes, and dispatch noted that Martinez sounded perfectly normal. At 10:30, he radioed in from Miller's Grocery, where he had stopped for coffee and, according to the store owner, spent 10 minutes chatting with regular customers about the upcoming high school homecoming game. Everyone who spoke with him that morning would later say the same thing. David Martinez seemed completely normal. His last official radio contact came at 1:47 p.m. He was conducting a routine traffic stop on Route 12, just outside the town limits. The driver he pulled over, a traveling salesman named Robert Chen, would later tell investigators that the sergeant was professional and courteous, issuing only a warning for speeding. "He seemed fine," Chen remembered. "Maybe a little distracted, but nothing alarming. He told me to drive safely and have a good day." After the traffic stop, Martinez was supposed to patrol the rural roads that connected Millbrook to the neighboring town of Oakdale. These roads wound through dense forest and farmland, areas where cell phone coverage was spotty and radio contact could be unreliable. At 3:30 p.m., dispatch attempted to reach Martinez for a routine check-in. No response. They tried again at 3:45. Still nothing. By 4 p.m., concern was beginning to build. Officer Bradley, Martinez's longtime partner, would later reveal something that hadn't been included in the official reports. About a week before David disappeared, he mentioned that he'd been getting some strange phone calls at home. Hang-ups mostly. But one time someone whispered something about him needing to mind his own business. When pressed for details, Bradley admitted that Martinez had downplayed the calls, suggesting they were probably just pranks. David wasn't the type to be easily intimidated, Bradley explained. But looking back, maybe he should have taken them more seriously. As the afternoon wore on and radio silence continued, what had started as mild concern was rapidly becoming something much more serious. Because in 18 years of service, David Martinez had never failed to respond to a radio call. Not once. The last confirmed sighting of Sergeant Martinez came from a farmer named Earl Thompson, who saw a police cruiser parked on the shoulder of Route 12 around 2:30 p.m. Thompson thought nothing of it at the time, assuming the officer was simply taking a break or monitoring traffic. But when investigators later interviewed Thompson, he revealed a detail that would haunt the investigation for years to come. There was another car there too, he said. A dark sedan, maybe blue or black. It was parked about 50 yards behind the police car. When asked why he hadn't mentioned this detail immediately, Thompson shrugged. Didn't think it was important. People park on that road all the time. By 5 p.m., the Millbrook Police Department faced a chilling reality. One of their own was missing, and no one had any idea why. At 5:15 p.m. on October 15, 1979, Chief Robert Harrison made the call that would change everything. He officially declared Sergeant David Martinez missing and launched what would become the largest search operation in the county is history. The timeline of Martinez's disappearance was frustratingly precise up to a point, then became a black hole of unanswered questions. His last radio contact at 1:47 p.m. during the traffic stop with Robert Chen, Earl Thompson's sighting of the police cruiser with the mysterious dark sedan at approximately 2:30 p.m. And then, nothing. The first breakthrough came at 6:30 p.m. when Officer Bradley discovered Martinez's patrol car. It was found exactly where Thompson had seen it, parked on the shoulder of Route 12, but now it sat alone. The dark sedan was nowhere to be found. What investigators found inside the patrol car was both revealing and deeply troubling. Martinez's radio was still functioning properly, ruling out equipment failure as an explanation for his silence. His service weapon was missing from its holster, but his backup gun remained secured in the glove compartment, untouched. More disturbing were the things that weren't there. Martinez's wallet was gone along with his badge and identification, but his wedding ring lay on the passenger seat as if it had been deliberately removed and placed there. Detective Ray Collins, who led the initial investigation, found several other details that didn't make sense. The driver's side door was unlocked, which was unusual for David. He was meticulous about security procedures. The keys were still in the ignition, but the engine was off. Perhaps most puzzling was the condition of the car's interior. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. It was as if Martinez had simply stepped out of the vehicle and vanished into thin air. The area around the patrol car yielded few clues. Investigators found footprints leading from the driver's side door to the edge of the forest, but the tracks disappeared after about 20 yards where the ground became too hard and rocky to hold impressions. A single cigarette butt was found near where the dark sedan had been parked. It was a brand that Martinez didn't smoke and it appeared relatively fresh. But in 1979, DNA testing wasn't available, and the cigarette butt would prove to be one of dozens of leads that led nowhere. The search expanded rapidly. By nightfall, over 50 officers from 3 different departments were combing the forest along Route 12. Search and rescue teams were called in from the state capitol. Helicopters with searchlights scanned the dense canopy from above, but the forest that bordered Route 12 was vast and unforgiving. Thousands of acres of thick woodland, rocky terrain, and hidden ravines. It was the kind of place where someone could disappear forever, either by choice or by force. As news of Martinez's disappearance spread, the community's reaction was swift and emotional. This wasn't just any missing person case. This was one of their own, a man who had spent nearly 2 decades protecting them. The idea that he could simply vanish was almost incomprehensible. By the second day, the investigation had taken on an urgency that bordered on desperation. Phone tips poured in by the dozens. Martinez had been seen at a gas station 50 miles away. He had been spotted boarding a bus in the state capitol. Someone claimed to have seen him arguing with a man in a dark sedan. But every lead led to disappointment. The gas station sighting was a case of mistaken identity. The bus passenger was ruled out after a thorough investigation. The argument witnesses claimed to have seen happened 2 weeks before Martinez's disappearance and involved a completely different officer. What emerged from the first 48 hours of investigation was a troubling pattern. David Martinez had simply ceased to exist at 2:30 p.m. on October 15, 1979. No trace of him could be found after that moment, despite the fact that dozens of people were actively looking. Detective Collins would later admit that the case defied all logic. "In my 25 years in law enforcement, I've never seen anything like it. People don't just disappear, especially not trained police officers. There's always something. A witness, a clue, a mistake by whoever took them. But with David, it was like he had been erased." The investigation's first major setback came on day 3, when a torrential rainstorm swept through the area. Any remaining physical evidence at the scene was washed away. Scent trails that the search dogs had been following disappeared. The forest, already difficult to search, became nearly impenetrable. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of those first few days was the silence. No ransom demands, no threatening calls, no body discovered. Just an empty patrol car and a family waiting for answers that refused to come. The disappearance of Sergeant David Martinez sent shockwaves through the Millbrook Police Department that extended far beyond the loss of a respected colleague. When a police officer vanishes without a trace, it forces everyone in law enforcement to confront their own vulnerability. If it could happen to David Martinez, it could happen to any of them. Chief Harrison assembled what he called the biggest investigative task force in the department's history. Detectives from 3 neighboring counties joined the effort. The state police assigned their most experienced missing persons investigators. Even the FBI offered assistance, though their involvement would later become a source of controversy. The official investigation proceeded along multiple tracks simultaneously. The first focused on Martinez's recent cases, looking for anyone who might have held a grudge serious enough to justify kidnapping or murder. Detective Collins and his team went back through 5 years of Martinez's arrests, court testimonies, and case files. What they found was frustrating in its ordinariness. Martinez had arrested his share of criminals over the years, but none stood out as particularly dangerous or vengeful. Most were small-time offenders, drunk drivers, petty thieves, domestic dispute calls. The few serious criminals he had helped convict were either still in prison or had established solid alibis for October 15th. The second track of investigation focused on Martinez's personal life, though this felt almost insulting to those who knew him. "We had to look at everything," Detective Collins explained years later. Marriage problems, financial difficulties, secret addictions, gambling debts. We had to consider the possibility that David had chosen to disappear. But this line of inquiry yielded nothing suspicious. The Martinez family's finances were stable. David and Maria's marriage appeared solid to everyone who knew them. There were no secret bank accounts, no mysterious withdrawals, no evidence of any kind of double life. The third investigative track was the most disturbing: the possibility that Martinez had been targeted specifically because he was a police officer. This theory gained credence when investigators discovered that Martinez wasn't the only law enforcement officer to have received threatening phone calls in recent months. Officer Tom Bradley revealed that he too had received hang-up calls at home, though not as many as Martinez. 2 other officers reported similar experiences. Detective Patricia Reeves admitted that someone had been following her car on several occasions, though she had dismissed it as paranoia at the time. "Looking back, it seems like someone was targeting our department," Chief Harrison said during a press conference 2 weeks after Martinez's disappearance. "We're investigating the possibility of organized criminal activity directed at law enforcement personnel." This theory led investigators down a rabbit hole of speculation about drug trafficking, organized crime, and corruption that would consume months of investigative work. Federal agents interviewed every member of the police department, looking for connections to criminal organizations or evidence of corruption that might explain the targeting of officers. But here, too, the investigation hit walls. The Millbrook Police Department was small, close-knit, and remarkably clean. Internal affairs had never found evidence of corruption. No officers had suspicious wealth or unexplained income. The department's drug seizures were properly documented and accounted for. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to fragment into competing theories. Some investigators believed Martinez had stumbled upon something criminal and been killed to keep him quiet. Others suspected he had been randomly targeted by someone with a grudge against police in general. A few investigators quietly explored the possibility that Martinez's disappearance was connected to a case he had been working on shortly before he vanished. 3 weeks before his disappearance, Martinez had been the first officer to respond to a domestic violence call at a rural farmhouse about 15 miles from where his patrol car was found. The call had seemed routine at the time. A woman named Linda Foster had reported that her boyfriend, Jake Morrison, had threatened her during an argument. Martinez had arrested Morrison for domestic assault, but Morrison had been released on bail 2 days later. What made this case interesting to investigators was Morrison's background. He had recently moved to the area from out of state and had a criminal record that included assault and weapons charges. More intriguingly, Morrison had disappeared around the same time as Martinez, abandoning his apartment and leaving no forwarding address. For several months, Morrison became the prime suspect in Martinez's disappearance. An APB was issued. Investigators tracked down his former associates and employers. They searched the farmhouse where he had lived with Linda Foster, but Morrison's trail had gone cold just as completely as Martinez's. No one had seen him since mid-October 1979. His car was never found. His bank account remained untouched. It was as if two men had vanished from the face of the earth at the same time. The frustration among investigators was palpable. "We were chasing shadows," Detective Collins admitted. "Every lead seemed promising until we followed it to its conclusion. Then we'd be right back where we started, with more questions than answers." As the first anniversary of Martinez's disappearance approached, the active investigation began to wind down. The task force was dissolved. Outside investigators returned to their home departments. The case was officially reclassified as a cold case, though it was never officially closed. Chief Harrison, addressing the media one final time, made a promise that would prove prophetic. "We will never stop looking for David Martinez. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to him, and someday, somehow, we're going to find out the truth." But no one could have predicted that the truth would remain buried in the forest for 25 years, waiting for a hunter to stumble upon it during what should have been a routine day in the woods. The disappearance of David Martinez created a wound in the community that refused to heal, but nowhere was that wound deeper than in the Martinez family home. Maria Martinez found herself living in a strange limbo, neither wife nor widow, unable to grieve properly because she didn't know if there was anything to grieve. In the weeks following David's disappearance, the house on Elm Street became a gathering place for hope and desperation. Friends, neighbors, and fellow officers stopped by at all hours, bringing casseroles and condolences, sharing theories and offering support. But as months passed and the investigation stalled, the visits became less frequent, the phone calls fewer, the community's attention inevitably drawn to other concerns. Maria struggled with decisions that most people never have to contemplate. Should she keep David's clothes in the closet? Should she maintain his side of the bed? How do you explain to your children that their father might be coming home, but probably isn't? The not knowing was the worst part, Maria would say years later. If David was dead, I could mourn him. If he had left us, I could be angry. But this was like being suspended in time, waiting for an answer that might never come. 16-year-old Michael Martinez threw himself into basketball and schoolwork, becoming obsessively focused on getting a scholarship to college. Friends and teachers worried about his refusal to talk about his father's disappearance, but Michael's strategy seemed to be pretending it hadn't happened at all. 14-year-old Sarah took a different approach, becoming convinced that her father was being held somewhere against his will and would eventually escape. She created elaborate theories about where he might be and what might have happened, filling notebook after notebook with her ideas and plans for finding him. The financial pressures were immediate and crushing. David's salary was the family's primary income, and while the police department continued his pay for several months and the community organized fundraisers, Maria eventually had to find work to support the family. She took a job as a secretary at the local elementary school, partly because it allowed her to be home when the children were home, but mostly because it was the only position she could concentrate on. "I couldn't handle anything that required too much focus," she admitted. "My mind was always somewhere else, wondering about David." The first year was marked by false hopes and crushing disappointments. Every unidentified body found in the region sparked a phone call from police and a rush of conflicting emotions. Maria found herself hoping the body would be David's, just so she would finally know, then feeling guilty for wishing her husband dead. Anonymous tips continued to trickle in long after the official investigation wound down. David had been seen working construction in Florida. He was living under an assumed name in California. Someone claimed to have seen him boarding a ship bound for South America. Each tip rekindled hope and required Maria to brace herself for another disappointment. The second anniversary of David's disappearance was marked by the first annual vigil, organized by Maria, and held at the spot where his patrol car had been found. About 50 people attended, including most of David's former colleagues and many community members who had never given up hope. "We gathered not just to remember David," Maria said at that first vigil, "but to let whoever took him know that we haven't forgotten and we never will. Someone out there knows what happened to my husband, and I want them to know that we're still waiting for answers." The vigils became an annual tradition, though attendance gradually dwindled over the years. By the 5th anniversary, only about 20 people showed up. By the 10th, it was mostly just family and David's closest friends from the police department. But Maria never missed a year, and neither did Tom Bradley, David's former partner. "It became this sacred thing for us," Bradley remembered. "Even when it seemed hopeless, even when people told us we should move on, we kept showing up. It was our way of saying that David Martinez still mattered." The children grew up in the shadow of their father's disappearance. Michael graduated as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to study engineering. Sarah became interested in criminal justice, partly inspired by her desire to understand what might have happened to her father. Both children struggled with relationships as adults. Michael married his college girlfriend but divorced after 3 years, unable to handle the emotional intimacy that reminded him of the pain of losing his father. Sarah became a police officer herself, joining the state police and specializing in missing persons cases. "I think we were both trying to solve the unsolvable," Sarah would later reflect. "Michael tried to control everything in his life so nothing could disappear unexpectedly again. I tried to solve other people's mysteries because I couldn't solve our own." Maria never remarried, though she had opportunities. "How could I?" she asked friends who encouraged her to date. "I'm still married to David. Until I know what happened to him, until I know he's really gone, I'm still his wife." As the years stretched into decades, the case of David Martinez became something of a local legend. New residents learned about it from longtime neighbors. Children heard whispered stories about the police officer who had vanished into thin air. The mystery became part of Millbrook's identity, a dark thread woven into the community's collective memory. But for the Martinez family, it wasn't a legend or a mystery. It was a daily reality of loss, uncertainty, and hope that refused to die completely even when logic said it should. By 2004, 25 years after David's disappearance, Maria had moved to a smaller house but still lived in Millbrook. Michael was a successful engineer living in Chicago with a new wife and 2 children he had named after his parents. Sarah was a detective with the state police, still working missing persons cases, still hoping that someday she might find the key to her father's disappearance. None of them could have imagined that the answer they had waited so long for was about to emerge from the forest, carried by a hunter who had no idea he was about to solve one of the region's most enduring mysteries. October 12, 2004, dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn morning that draws hunters deep into the woods in search of deer. Mark Patterson, a 43-year-old local contractor and lifelong hunter, had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Bow season was in full swing, and Patterson knew these woods better than most, having hunted them since he was a teenager. The forest that bordered Route 12 had always been his favorite hunting spot, despite its reputation among locals as the place where Sergeant Martinez had vanished 25 years earlier. Patterson had been just 18 then, and he remembered the massive search operation that had combed through these same woods for weeks without finding a trace of the missing officer. But on this particular morning, as Patterson made his way through the dense undergrowth about 2 miles from where Martinez's patrol car had been found, he wasn't thinking about old mysteries. He was focused on a deer trail he'd been scouting for weeks, following fresh tracks deeper into the forest than he'd ever ventured before. It was just after 7 a.m. when Patterson first noticed something odd. About 30 yards off the deer trail, partially hidden by fallen logs and overgrown with 25 years of forest vegetation, was what appeared to be a depression in the ground. At first glance it looked natural, just another irregular dip in the uneven forest floor. But something about it nagged at Patterson. The depression was too regular, too rectangular, and as he approached for a closer look, he realized that what he had initially taken for rotting logs were actually pieces of weathered wood, arranged in a deliberate pattern. My first thought was that someone had built a hunting blind years ago and abandoned it, Patterson would later tell investigators. But as I got closer, I could see that wasn't right. The wood was arranged like it was covering something. Patterson's discovery process was methodical, partly from caution and partly from a growing sense that he had stumbled onto something significant. Using a stick, he carefully moved aside the rotted wood planks and layers of decomposed leaves. What he found underneath would haunt him for the rest of his life. First, he uncovered what appeared to be fabric, badly deteriorated but still recognizable as having once been dark blue. Then he saw something metallic glinting in the filtered sunlight. As he cleared away more debris, the metallic object revealed itself to be a tarnished badge. Patterson's hands were shaking as he carefully lifted the badge from its resting place. Even tarnished and dirty, he could make out the words Millbrook Police and the number 247. He didn't need to be a local historian to know what that meant. Every longtime resident of Millbrook knew that number. Sergeant David Martinez had been badge number 247. But Patterson's discovery was far from complete. Beneath the badge and the remnants of what had once been a police uniform, he found bones, human bones, carefully arranged and showing clear signs of having been deliberately buried and concealed. More disturbing still were the other items scattered throughout the makeshift grave. A police-issue service weapon, its serial number matching the one assigned to Martinez. A wallet, its leather rotted away but its contents still partially preserved in plastic sleeves. And something that would prove to be the most chilling discovery of all, handcuffs that appeared to have been used to restrain the victim. Patterson immediately backed away from the site and called 911 from his cell phone. His call, logged at 7:43 a.m., was brief and shaken. "I'm in the state forest off Route 12, and I think I found the police officer who disappeared years ago. You need to send someone out here right away." The response was swift and massive. Within an hour, the forest was crawling with investigators, forensic specialists, and officials from multiple law enforcement agencies. The site was immediately cordoned off as a crime scene, and Patterson was asked to remain on site to guide investigators to the exact location. Detective Sarah Martinez, now 39 years old and a seasoned investigator with the state police, received the call at 8:15 a.m. She was reviewing case files at her desk when her supervisor approached with an expression she had never seen before. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need you to sit down. We've found your father." The next few hours were a blur of procedures, protocols, and emotions that Sarah had trained for professionally, but could never have prepared for personally. As the detective assigned to the case, she was technically required to step aside due to conflict of interest. But as the victim's daughter, she was also one of the few people who could immediately identify personal items that might confirm the identity of the remains. The preliminary examination at the scene revealed several crucial details. The body had been buried in a shallow grave but had been covered with wooden planks and carefully concealed. This wasn't a hasty disposal. Someone had taken time to hide the body properly, suggesting both premeditation and knowledge of the area. More disturbing was the evidence of how Martinez had died. The handcuffs suggested he had been restrained, possibly for an extended period. The position of the remains indicated he had been shot, though the exact cause of death would have to be determined through forensic analysis. But perhaps most significant was what wasn't found at the burial site. Martinez's patrol car keys were missing, suggesting that whoever killed him had used his own vehicle to transport his body to this remote location. His radio was also missing, though investigators would later determine that it had been found in his patrol car the day he disappeared. As news of the discovery spread, the community that had lived with this mystery for 25 years struggled to process the reality that their questions were finally being answered. But with answers came new questions, darker and more disturbing than the original mystery. Who had killed David Martinez? Why had they taken such care to hide his body? And, most chilling of all, had his killer been living among them all these years, watching as the community held vigils and searched for answers to a mystery they had created? The confirmation that the remains found in the forest belonged to Sergeant David Martinez sent shockwaves through a community that had never fully healed from his disappearance. After 25 years of uncertainty, the Martinez family finally had the answer they had desperately sought. But it came with a terrible finality that hope had somehow made bearable. Maria Martinez, now 67 years old, received the official notification at her home on October 13, 2004. Detective Collins, who had led the original investigation and was now nearing retirement, delivered the news personally. "We found him, Maria," he said simply. "We found David." The mixture of relief and devastation that followed was unlike anything she had experienced, even during the darkest days immediately after David's disappearance. "For 25 years I held on to this tiny hope that maybe he was alive somewhere. Maybe he had amnesia or was being held against his will," Maria later explained. Finding his body meant finally knowing the truth, but it also meant accepting that the hope I'd carried all these years was gone forever. The forensic examination of Martinez's remains provided crucial evidence for what had now become a murder investigation. The medical examiner determined that Martinez had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head, with his own service weapon. The positioning of the wounds suggested that the chest shot had been intended to incapacitate, while the head shot had been the killing blow. The condition of the remains also revealed disturbing details about Martinez's final hours. Evidence suggested he had been restrained with his own handcuffs for a significant period before being killed. Forensic analysts found traces of rope fibers on the bones, indicating he had been bound as well as handcuffed. "This wasn't a random killing or a crime of passion," explained Detective Lieutenant James Morrison, who had been assigned to lead the reopened investigation. "Someone planned this carefully. They restrained Officer Martinez, held him for a period of time, and then executed him with his own weapon." The investigation into Martinez's murder began with a comprehensive review of the original case files, but now investigators had the advantage of 25 years of technological advancement. DNA testing, unavailable in 1979, could now be performed on evidence that had been carefully preserved. The cigarette butt found near Martinez's patrol car in 1979 yielded a DNA profile, though it didn't match anyone in the criminal database. Hair fibers found on Martinez's uniform also provided DNA evidence, confirming this was the same individual but still not identifying the killer. The investigation quickly focused on Jake Morrison, the domestic violence suspect who had disappeared around the same time as Martinez. Morrison's background check revealed a pattern of violence against authority figures, including 2 previous assaults on police officers in other states. But Morrison himself remained as elusive as ever. Despite renewed efforts to locate him, investigators found no trace of Morrison after October 1979. His social security number had never been used again. No driver's licenses had been issued in his name. No bank accounts, no credit cards, no official records of any kind. Either Jake Morrison died around the same time as Sergeant Martinez, or he assumed a completely new identity, Detective Morrison explained. Given the level of planning evident in Martinez's murder, the second option seems more likely. The reopened investigation also revealed information that had been missed or dismissed in 1979. 3 witnesses came forward with information they had been too frightened to share 25 years earlier. All 3 described seeing Morrison in the weeks before Martinez's disappearance, and all 3 reported that Morrison had made threatening statements about getting even with the cops. Linda Foster, Morrison's former girlfriend, had moved out of state shortly after his disappearance and had never been properly interviewed by the original investigators. When detectives finally located her in 2004, she provided crucial information about Morrison's state of mind in the days before Martinez vanished. Jake was obsessed with the idea that the police were out to get him, Foster revealed. He kept talking about how they had ruined his life by arresting him, and he said he was going to make one of them pay for it. He specifically mentioned the sergeant who had arrested him. Foster also revealed that Morrison had detailed knowledge of the rural roads around Millbrook. Having spent time exploring the area during hunting season, he knew those woods better than most locals, she said. He used to brag about knowing places where no one would ever find anything if he wanted to hide it. But perhaps most chilling was Foster's description of Morrison's behavior in the days immediately following Martinez's disappearance. He came back to the house that night acting strange, excited but also paranoid. He kept looking out the windows and saying he needed to leave town. The next morning he was gone. The renewed investigation brought some measure of closure to the Martinez family, but it also opened old wounds and created new fears. If Morrison was still alive, he had evaded justice for 25 years. If he was dead, they might never know for certain what had happened to David Martinez or why. For Sarah Martinez, now Detective Sarah Martinez, working on her father's murder case presented both an opportunity and a terrible burden. I had spent my entire career trying to solve other people's mysteries, she reflected. Now I finally had the chance to solve the one that had defined my life, but I also had to confront the reality of how my father died. The case remained officially open, but as months passed without significant new leads, investigators began to acknowledge that Jake Morrison might never be found. 25 years is a long time, Detective Morrison admitted. If Morrison is still alive, he's had a quarter-century to disappear completely, but we'll never stop looking. For the community of Millbrook, the discovery of Martinez's body brought an end to one of their most enduring mysteries, but it also forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere out there, David Martinez's killer might still be alive, carrying the secret of what happened in those woods on October 15, 1979. The story of Sergeant David Martinez serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly life can change, how suddenly the ordinary can become extraordinary, and how even those sworn to protect us are not immune to the darkness that exists in our world. On a crisp October morning in 1979, David Martinez kissed his wife goodbye, promised to attend his daughter's soccer game, and left for what should have been a routine day of police work. He could never have imagined that within hours, he would become the victim of the very type of crime he had spent his career investigating. For 25 years, the mystery of his disappearance haunted a community and devastated a family. His wife waited for answers that seemed destined never to come. His children grew up in the shadow of uncertainty, shaped by a loss they couldn't fully comprehend or properly grieve. The discovery of Martinez's remains in 2004 provided some closure, but it also raised disturbing questions about justice delayed and potentially denied. Jake Morrison, the prime suspect in Martinez's murder, had vanished as completely as his victim, leaving behind only questions and the bitter possibility that some crimes may never be fully resolved. What happened to David Martinez could happen to anyone. A chance encounter with the wrong person at the wrong time. A split-second decision that leads to catastrophe. A moment when evil crosses paths with innocence and changes everything forever. The badge that Martinez wore represented his commitment to serving and protecting others, but it couldn't protect him when he needed it most. The training that had prepared him to handle dangerous situations proved insufficient when faced with someone willing to kill in cold blood. His story reminds us that heroes are human, that those who dedicate their lives to keeping us safe face risks we may never fully appreciate. Every time a police officer puts on their uniform and walks out the door, they're accepting the possibility that they may not come home. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of David Martinez's story is how ordinary it began. He wasn't investigating a major crime or pursuing a dangerous criminal. He was conducting routine patrol, stopping speeders, and checking in with dispatch. It was the kind of day that thousands of police officers experience without incident. Yet somewhere in those routine hours, Martinez encountered someone who had already decided to kill him, someone who had planned carefully, chosen their location, and waited for the right opportunity. Someone who walked among the community afterward, watching as searches were conducted and vigils were held for a man they had murdered. The woods where Martinez's body was found had been searched extensively in 1979, but his killer had chosen the burial site well. For 25 years, hikers, hunters, and investigators passed within yards of the grave without realizing it was there. Nature had gradually reclaimed the site, covering the evidence of murder with layers of leaves and fallen branches. When Mark Patterson made his discovery in 2004, he had been hunting in those same woods for decades. The irony that Martinez's body had been hidden so close to where people regularly ventured speaks to both the killer's desperation and their knowledge of the area. Today, a small memorial marks the spot where Martinez's patrol car was found abandoned on Route 12. Fresh flowers appear there regularly, left by family members, former colleagues, and community members who refuse to let his sacrifice be forgotten. The annual vigil continues, though it's now held in his memory rather than in hope of his return. Maria Martinez, now in her 80s, still attends when her health permits. Sarah Martinez, who retired from the state police in 2019, has taken over organizing the event. "We gather not just to remember my father," Sarah said at the most recent vigil, "but to honor all the officers who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe, and to remind ourselves that evil exists in our world, but so does the courage to stand against it." The case of David Martinez remains officially open. Jake Morrison has never been found, and investigators acknowledge that he may never be. But the search for justice continues, driven by the belief that some crimes are too heinous to abandon, some victims too important to forget. In the end, David Martinez's story is a reminder that heroism often comes with a price, that justice is sometimes delayed but should never be abandoned, and that the questions we carry can haunt us longer than the answers we seek. Somewhere out there, someone knows what really happened on that October day in 1979. Someone knows where Jake Morrison went and whether he's still alive. Someone holds the final pieces of a puzzle that has consumed a family and community for over 4 decades. Until those answers come, David Martinez's story remains unfinished. A haunting reminder that some mysteries endure long after hope has faded, and that sometimes the truth we seek is darker than the uncertainty we've learned to live with. But his memory lives on in the dedication of those who continue to serve and protect, in the love of a family that never gave up hope, and in the determination of a community that refuses to let a good man's sacrifice be forgotten. The badge may have failed to protect him, but David Martinez's legacy continues to inspire others to wear it with honor, knowing that the price of protecting others may sometimes be the ultimate sacrifice.